Good afternoon, North Jersey. It is day after Election Day, and about 2/3 of New Jersey voters passed a vote to legalize marijuana across the state. Now, what's next? We're here to tell you what is next. Alrighty, so here this afternoon is our very own reporter from Asbury Park Press, Mike Davis. How are you doing, Mike?
Hey, hanging in there. It's been a bit of a wild week for New Jersey and obviously the rest of the country.
Absolutely. Very busy with elections. Results still trickling in, but at least in the Garden State, we know that weed is legal. So, Mike, tell us what's going on. What's next?
Yeah, it's been about a 3-year battle at least. I mean, since it became a really mainstream issue here in New Jersey. What we're looking at is basically the legalization of marijuana for adult use, for recreational purposes. Now, obviously, New Jersey already has a medical marijuana program in place, and it's been getting a little bit better year over year. But this is about marijuana for recreation. The same thing that's happening already in states like Colorado, like Washington, like Oregon, like Massachusetts, and we're going to see that. We're going to see that over the next year in New Jersey. Pretty soon, we're going to start to see some moves being made to get this done, at least formalized through the legislature. But it's still 2 days later, and we'll talk to some people later. Everybody's pretty happy that this pretty monumental change has finally come to New Jersey.
Absolutely, very monumental. Now, let's backtrack a little bit. Can you explain a little to our viewers how we got here, how we got to this point?
Sure. So Governor Phil Murphy, when he ran for office in 2017, this was actually a really big campaign platform for him. It was a couple of different progressive issues, the minimum wage for $15 being one of them. But legalizing marijuana was one of the ones that was almost seemed like New Jersey catching up to what other states were doing. Now, obviously, the way the legislature works in New Jersey, nothing is that easy. So even though Senate President Steve Sweeney, Assembly Speaker Craig Coughlin, they were both on board, it still took a number of years to get where we are now. Most notably, last year, there was a bill to legalize marijuana through the legislature, which wouldn't need a vote by the constituents. That came about two votes short, or else we would have already been living in a state where this is legal already. So after that didn't work out, they put it on the ballot, and that's how we wound up here where we are now. This is the pretty standard model used in a lot of other states. All of the now 15 states with legal weed, only 2 of them have done it through the legislative model. The one thing New Jersey has to do now is kind of figure out what goes next, because the way it works is that the ballot question changes the Constitution, but now you got to kind of put that plan into action and figure out what to do on a legal level, which we'll talk about today.
Gotcha. So what's really pending is this framework, right? In terms of how folks can, use legal weed. I'm assuming you can't just walk around with it in your hand. I'm sure there's going to be some regulations. So that's something that I'm sure we'll see in your reporting. Now, another question for you. Why was it able to pass so easy?
Well, I think the main thing here is, let's go with 2 things. The national opinion, I really mean nationwide, opinion about marijuana has changed dramatically. I mean, right now, you're living in a country where about 1 in every 3 people are living in a state with legal marijuana. So it's really a national change that has happened. But the other thing is this. It's become a hugely bipartisan issue. And you just look at what happened on election night. New Jersey is obviously a Democratic powerhouse. But of the other 3 states that legalize marijuana, Arizona is seen kind of purple. It's a toss-up. But South Dakota and Montana are Republican strongholds. And just like New Jersey, they didn't pass the bill as overwhelmingly, but those bills passed. And they're going to join the ranks of everybody else.
Absolutely. Was this expected? Did we expect to see this kind of result here in the Garden State?
I think we did expect to see it pass. All of the scientific polling that had been out there from places like Monmouth and Fairleigh Dickinson University had it at about 61% approval, but there were some internal polls that had it at that 67, 68% mark, which is closer to what we're seeing today. A full 2/3 of voters supporting it. I think another crazy thing when you look at with that, and it goes back to the bipartisanship involved, is this question passed in every single county, and that includes some of the really conservative strongholds like Ocean County and Monmouth County. So there really was support across the board for this.
Absolutely. Great. Well, that's good to know. Now, I think what the most important question for all viewers and everyone in the state really is, when can we go to a dispensary? When can we buy this? When can that happen?
I can tell you honestly, that is the number one question from all the emails I've gotten, all the tweets I've received. The easiest way to explain it is that in the other states that legalized marijuana on the ballot, it was about a year-long process. So you legalized it in November and then January of the following year. So right now we're talking about January 2022. Now, it could happen sooner than that, but I don't know if it'll be that much sooner. There's a lot of work that has to be done to really build this market out from scratch. But obviously, New Jersey has skin in the game. We're talking about a very popular issue that could very well be spreading to other states pretty soon. And I think New Jersey wants to try to get in on the ground floor as far as the Northeast goes.
Absolutely. Great. Well, looks like it's going to be a wait and see. And you are our resident cannabis expert here with the USA Today Network. So, Mike, let's bring in another guest. How about that? Let's extend the conversation. Awesome. So we're going to bring in Amal Sanahi. He is the executive director for the ACLU here in New Jersey and chair of the NJCAN 2020 campaign. Hello, Amal. How are you?
Hello. It's good to be with you both.
Awesome. Well, you're joining the conversation here, and Mike here has some questions on what we can expect moving forward with this.
Well, so I think the best place to start them all is New Jersey ran its campaign pretty differently compared to a lot of other states. I mean, the messaging that was out there from NJCAN 2020, the campaign that you chaired, was about the fact that Black people in this state are 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than white marijuana users. And then you also throw into the fact that there's hundreds of $millions that are spent by police in order to, police and arrest and prosecute these crimes. So I ask you, now that this campaign was so successful, do you think this is a model for other states to follow if they start looking towards legalization?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Mike, and thank you, Jesse, for having us. Look, this was a unique campaign because we said from the get-go that we weren't going to run this like politics as usual in New Jersey. We were going to lead with racial justice messaging, and I think the reason this was consequential is because we made racial justice messaging politically winnable, if that makes sense. We made sure that we were front and center with racial justice every step of the way, and we made sure that it had political consequence. Early on, years ago, when I joined the ACLU of New Jersey and made this a priority for us, legalization a priority for us, I said to folks that we are going to make it politically toxic in New Jersey to talk about marijuana legalization and not talk about racial justice. Because this is an issue in an industry that has been built on the backs of criminalized people of color for decades in the United States. And it's important and necessary to make sure that we're talking about racial justice every step of the way. So I do think that proving to the world that racial justice messaging can win, proving that you can win politics by staying steadfast in principle, is something that it should be a lesson learned for campaigns going forward.
Right. Now, obviously, New Jersey legalized this through the ballot measure, and that came with some drawbacks, notably that the ballot question itself was relatively broad because you're talking about amending the state constitution. We just got word today that as soon as Monday, the legislature is expected to start having hearings on these enabling bills, the actual legal part of amending the Constitution. How important is it to make sure that racial and social justice are still in there and that they're not lost once Trenton gets involved?
It's the most important part of this whole thing. The details matter, and it's either the devil or the angel that's in those details. And I think one of the things that we are going to be looking for is how true to the voters' interest the legislature decides to stick its legislation into. I'm scrambling my words here, but you know what I'm saying. I think what we need to see is legislation that reflects the voice of the people. The voters delivered to the legislature its marching orders. We want to see legislation that reflects social justice. Our internal polling demonstrated that voters care about a couple of things. They care about the fact that Black folks are arrested at a rate 3.5 times that of white folks, even though usage rates are the same. They care about the fact that arrest numbers include over 32,000 arrests annually for possession alone. They care about the fact that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on arrests and processing those arrests. They care about the fact that we're wasting judicial resources on something that people, for the vast majority of people, believe should be legalized. And they care about the fact that this is something that could bring economic boons to those communities that have been hardest hit by the war on drugs. And those are the messages that the legislature needs to implement in its legislation. So it's incredibly important that legislation centers racial justice, because if it doesn't, again, we're going to be building an elite white industry on the backs of criminalized people of color. And it's not going to be representative. And for us to do that on something that has had such a wide-ranging racial disparity would be a gross injustice.
Yeah, and like once again, everybody, starting Monday, you can probably check northjersey.com and app.com for all the coverage. I'll be paying attention to the hearings on these bills that are expected to be introduced and made public sometime in the next day or so. Now, Amal, yesterday the Attorney General issued a statement saying that it can't direct police officers and prosecutors to do more in light of this legalization ballot question than just offer broad discretion, which obviously is something police and prosecutors have had for a long time now. It seems like sort of passing the buck to the legislature, but I wonder from your end, do you think the AG's office should have said anything differently, should be acting any stronger with this?
I absolutely think that the Attorney General's office has the power to. They have the ability to say to police that you should no longer arrest people for cannabis possession. They have the ability to say to prosecutors, you should no longer prosecute people for cannabis possession. And I think they could have acted more strongly than they did. But I also think that every institution has failed in this regard, right? That we should have had legislation to decriminalize lined up and ready to go as soon as we knew that the vote was going to be a yes vote, which was very likely for a long time. We should have had the Attorney General's office or the executive branch talking about what to do to fill the gap, because there's going to be this time period between the yes vote and the date of passage of any legislation and the effective date of that legislation, right? We should have had an executive order or an Attorney General directive ready to go. And courts should all along have been rethinking whether or not it's appropriate for prosecutors to be bringing such cases, including one in Ocean County where we had just recently the Ocean County prosecutor appeal a dismissal of low-level marijuana possession, meaning that a couple of kids were caught with a joint. They were arrested. They had their charges dismissed because the lower court said this is a de minimis violation, so no need to slap these kids with a criminal record. The Ocean County prosecutor decided to go forward with the case and appeal it to the appellate division, which reversed the case, and meaning that they reinstated those criminal penalties on those kids. So these kids are now going to be slapped with a criminal conviction that's going to have collateral consequences for a very long time. And meanwhile, this was maybe 3 days before New Jerseyans voted to legalize. It just doesn't make any sense. The votes have been counted. We have won overwhelmingly. I think it's time that every branch of government get their affairs in order and reflect the will of the people.
Absolutely. Now, Amal, one last question for you. I know you work closely with communities, but specifically, what's happening on the ground with communities of color now that we're on the other side of this?
Well, I think there's a potential for a lot of confusion. People voted yes on this ballot question. As Mike mentioned, that leads to a constitutional amendment that's going to be triggered on January 1. So the Constitution of our state is going to be amended on January 1. But in between now and then, we need legislation to actually legalize the possession and sale of cannabis. Until then, as we know from the Attorney General's guidance, there's the potential for people to still be arrested. So we're talking to communities all across the state and putting out in our messaging, that you shouldn't feel free to do whatever it is that you want, because the potential for you to be arrested is still there. And of course, since we know that the arrests are racially disparate, we know that Black and brown communities are more vulnerable to these police interactions. So what I'm really nervous about, and what I think is an injustice and a failure on our part as a state, is that people voted yes on November 3rd, and people are still going to continue to be arrested on November 4th, and continue to be arrested today. And we're making over 100 of these arrests every day, which is just, it should shock the conscience. And meanwhile, we have a pretty thriving medical industry. We have the cannabis dispensaries knocking on the door of New Jerseyans to try to get us stood up as an industry that's for adult use. And we are trying to still simultaneously saddle people with criminal convictions that has impact on them for the rest of their lives. It makes no sense. So we're trying to clarify what's going on right now. We're giving people guidance. But again, this highlights the shortcomings of our state in every branch, including local municipal prosecutors, municipal police departments, the Attorney General's office, the governor's office, and the legislature for sure, for not having done what it should have done and made sure that we stop the arrests and stop the bleeding.
Absolutely. Well, Amal, thank you so much for joining us with this conversation. And there's still a lot of work to be done, and we'll catch up with you later.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Now, Mike, I know that you have been working on not some legislation, reporting today on the recent legislation that's passing. Can you tell us a little bit about, your story today and what you're reporting on?
Sure. So, along with a lot of our colleagues from across the USA Today Network and the Atlantic Group, we really wanted to take a look at what might happen with the other states around us, because there's been this idea that New Jersey is sort of the first domino to fall. Now, obviously, New York and Pennsylvania, those are the big states, and they've had conversations about this over the years. Perfect example, like Amal was talking about, is trying to keep social justice in the center of it. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, his efforts to do this have really been based on economics. I mean, he once used it as an idea to maybe fund the subway. He's also used it as an idea to fill in some budget gaps with COVID-19. But he's faced a lot of the same pushback that you might expect from Black lawmakers who are saying there needs to be more social justice language in this bill, both in terms of putting money towards these communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs and setting aside licenses and different treatment for people of color. Pennsylvania has had that language more up front than New York has. Governor Tom Wolf and Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, they've both made it a policy point when they talk about legalization. But both of those states, I think, are still a little bit farther away. I mean, look at New Jersey. Like I said, this was a 3-year battle to get to this point, and it involved the state having to kind of change course a little bit and do it by the ballot, something they didn't want to do in the first place. The other 2 big states near us are Delaware and Maryland. Both have some pretty progressive policies in terms of medical marijuana and decriminalization. But Governor John Carney in Delaware and Governor Larry Hogan in Maryland, they've been sort of mum on the subject. Some of our colleagues in those states have said, especially in Maryland, Governor Hogan might very well be willing to pull the trigger on legalization now that New Jersey is legalized, but we're going to have to wait and see what that looks like, because like I said, this is going to be a little bit of a long process for all those states.
Absolutely. We're here for the long haul, and there's more to come. So let's switch some gears here. We're going to bring in our second guest for the evening. We have attorney at Archer Law and member of the New Jersey Can 2020 campaign, Bill Caruso, who's going to talk a little bit about what we can expect moving forward.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Mike has some questions for you moving forward.
So, great. Bill, obviously, like we've talked about, the next step are these enabling legislation. You worked in the legislature for a number of years. For those playing along at home that may not be familiar with the machinations and how Trenton works, what does this mean to turn a ballot question into something that's actually going to change some laws?
Well, I was listening to the last segment with the mole, and I'm thinking that one of the areas we might want to dedicate some of this new revenue is for civics lessons for the public, because he's right. There is a lesson right now of what happens next. And both in terms of, for everyone watching at home, please don't go light up in public. We're not ready for that yet. You will get arrested. There's a gap, right? There's a gap between the enactment of this constitutional amendment that will occur both, statutorily and regulatorily. And I'll say what I mean there. We have to pass a bill now. It seems ridiculous and counterproductive. We couldn't pass a bill, so we went to the public, and now we're back to the legislature to pass a bill to enact this. And that's going to provide the detail, the framework. And then the regulations will then be developed as we go. So right now, the constitutional amendment says this is now constitutionally permitted. It's very vague, though. It doesn't give a lot of detail to it. So who and where and how and what, that's going to be sort of defined in a broad framework with the legislation. Hopefully that will be passed in the next week or two, signed into law by the governor. And then there's going to be a regulatory body that's going to start developing a framework of, well, what do the labels need to say? And how many of these places should there be? And what are the rules to get one of these things? And that will be developed over a course of period. So that's what's to come. What I'm hopeful for and we're expecting is an expeditious end to the statutory piece of this. The legislature must adopt this framework to end the arrests, number one. I think there's a discussion about, Amol had indicated, the people that have been arrested since this stalled in the legislature. There's an ability, or there's an effort to wipe the slate clean of those present charges. And then we will develop the framework for the market that will generate revenue and how that revenue will be expended. That'll all be part of this legislation.
Is that all? That's all I got to do?
That's it. We're done. After that, 41-21 and the governor, and we're all set.
So you mentioned obviously the efforts last year to pass this legislatively. That bill in 2019, which you were pretty actively in support of, was pretty well regarded by both folks on the economic side and a lot of the social justice side too. So do you think that bill is going to be the framework, or do you think we're going to see some changes now that we went through a completely different process to legalize this?
I hope it is, because I think it's in a lot of cases settled area. I'll say two things for you. We need to get something done. We need to get something done very quickly, or else we will have chaos on the back end. Without any rules, it'll be a problem. I think starting with that, which really failed because I think there was still a lack of public support. Mike, this issue started back really in earnest in 2014, 2015. NJUMR kind of kicked off this effort, but really started, I mean, people were laughing at us back in that time. The polls were in the 40s. So to see in really a short amount of time, in the course of 5 years, which is a blip in a political cycle, we've changed the court of public opinion. 2/3 of New Jerseyans now support this. So I do think there's a change in the culture. What I am concerned of right now is we are going to get to a place where we always get in Trenton, is we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think there's an urgency to get something done now. There's a framework of a bill passed, and the prospect of doing so much more in the future. I've joked with my colleagues in the media and other places. This is the full employment for legislators, lobbyists, lawyers, activists, and reporters. We are going to be modifying this statute going forward for years and decades.
Great. Obviously, so you mentioned you work with New Jersey United for Marijuana Reform, and that was one group and had a lot of different platforms involved in lobbying for that original bill. One of them was home grow, allowing people to grow cannabis plants at home. And it seems to have been the one white whale that nobody ever seemed to get through the legislature. Do you think that happens at some point? Do you think it's now or later?
I do. I don't know if it happens on this round, but I think we're going to get there. I think there's been a misconception across the board. First of all, I don't think the industry, if there really is even an industry, there's a whole group of individual companies that are out there right now, and I don't know they speak in one voice just yet. They don't really care about patient home grow. It's not an issue for them, by and large. There may be individuals out there, but most of the folks I've talked to could care less. The legislatures are the one, and to some extent mayors are concerned, because I think they misunderstand the issue. We learned when we were out in Colorado that the co-op issue was what was the Colorado governmental officials and policymakers concern. They allowed these large co-ops to form, which were a bunch of people getting together to home grow together under one umbrella. It looked a lot like a commercial warehouse. That's different. Having a patient who either can't afford or can't get a particular strain of marijuana that helps their affliction, that's common sense. That's decent. That's not a threat to anybody. It's not even something that I think that needs to be that highly regulated. So, we've seen other jurisdictions, 6 plants or less. I think that's completely reasonable. And there's frankly support in the legislature now for something like that.
Sure. And like I said before, it seems like this is New Jersey might be the domino for the Northeast, maybe the rest of the country. Is that how you see it? I mean, you've worked with a lot of clients in this field. Are they looking at New Jersey as sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back?
Yeah, it was interesting this year, and it's been a very interesting year, of course, but all eyes were on New Jersey. I talked to a lot of folks around the nation, some folks out of the country. All eyes were on New Jersey. New Jersey is one of the largest potential markets on the Eastern Seaboard. Massachusetts is obviously first. They've done a fairly good job. But when you look at the population around our state, you look at the opportunities here, there are a lot of focus on New Jersey. Our market, oddly enough, is very small. I mean, we have 12 operators that are licensed here right now, not all of which are open and operating. We have 24 more looming on the horizon whenever the litigation gets settled, and those hopefully will be awarded soon. But there's so much opportunity here. I mean, I don't think we've scratched the surface of it.
Absolutely. Well, Bill, any final thoughts on this large conversation and moving forward?
I'm excited. I think this is an example, though, of where we need to be in our larger politics in the country. There are a lot of divergent opinions about marijuana use and legalization of adult use marijuana. Advocacy got us here. Advocacy got us to the place where we won this ballot question. Advocacy had won hearts and minds to change people's opinions and culture about this. So it's given me a lot of faith as a policy guy that came from government, that works in a law firm, and as a lobbyist, to work with advocates to be able to go into churches, into libraries, into community halls, and sit with 17 people on a Saturday night and talk about cannabis over the course of the last 5 years. That got this done. It can be done. It honestly can be done.
Absolutely, it can be done. Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and looks like the work continues.
It's a pleasure. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Awesome, folks. So thanks so much for joining us on this little debrief of what we can expect moving forward. Make sure to catch up with our reporter, Mike Davis at Asbury Park Press, for future reporting on all cannabis things related. Mike, any last words?
Like I said, Monday's going to be a big day. We're going to have the first hearings on those pieces of enabling legislation that both Amal and Bill talked about. So stay with me. You can see my Twitter account at the bottom of the screen. I'll be tweeting all day. And definitely keep in touch with northjersey.com and app.com, because we're going to have all the latest, not just Monday, but going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, folks.